Revolution. And that is some new stuff I'm working on. I got commissioned to do a real heavy music project. I can't really talk about it right now, exactly what it is, but I kind of want to, I can't. But I finally got a mildly working interface to record some guitar stuff, so I had to try some stuff out for this new project that I'm working on. That being said, this episode today is one we've been trying to do for a while, and if you watch the live stream, sometimes I'll say, hey, if you guys know someone you want us to talk to, throw it out there. Maybe we can get a hold of them. More often than not, people throw out some like super large names of cats that you have to like talk to their PR people, and you're never going to hear back from them when it's like that. But somebody had thrown out Brian Meir from Brasil Wire. They're like, he's a good source of contemporary Brazilian politics, and I think you'd like talking to him. And they actually had hit up Brian Meir and did the introduction. And once we got the dates all worked out, bam, we were able to get a hold of him. The only downside is that we couldn't do it for the live stream and make it a little more interactive, as I kind of like to do things like that, but that's fine. But we were having some Wi-Fi issues. Such is the problem of this new era of Corona and no in-studio stuff, right? Trying to get everybody synced, make sure everybody's Wi-Fi is working at optimum level. So that was the one downside. And other than that, I would have had the interview go a lot longer. As you know, the format's somewhat changed where after we do the first hour, we do an extra hour, sometimes plus, for patrons only. And we just were having too many Wi-Fi issues to continue. But we did get a quality hour in with Brian Meir, where he went off on some actually really interesting tangents on contemporary Brazilian politics, where things are with Lula, kind of Bolsonaro's fear right now, right? Because Lula is free to run again. And me personally, I feel like this is a more fired up Lula. So I'm actually excited to see what happens for Brazil's next election. Bolsonaro's party is losing a lot of power, so I'm excited. I'm excited to see what happens. For those of you that don't know, this show started off as a bit of a music show, and in 2019, in our summer, we went down to Brazil. I think it was their fall. And did a tour down there, and it was a great time. So, and I've been following Brazilian politics before that tour. I kind of really started following it heavy around the time Dilma Rousseff was getting, the coup against Dilma was going on. So I have a lot of love for the people of Brazil. So I will stop talking and get right into our interview with Brian Meir from Brasil Wire. And I will pitch it again. For those of you that are not subscribers to the YouTube, wherever you are listening to this podcast, there are links in the description to the YouTube channel. Every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we do a live stream that is extremely interactive. Thursday, Pacific Standard Time, we do a more, I don't want to say current events, but it's generally either economy and like socialist, Marxist, Leninist, history-based, or foreign policy from an insider perspective base. And then Saturday is the fun show, as we call it. And Saturday I call it the free show because we don't cut it off at an hour. Sometimes we go 5 hours on Saturday. And as you'll hear this on Sunday, so the Saturday will be over. But Saturday shows at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thursday shows at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, wherever you're listening to this, there are links in the description to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. Also, if you like the show and you feel so inclined, you'd like to help the show grow, this is listener supported, become a patron. You get all the bonus content. You get the after hours shows, which have been crazy fun. This most recent after hours show, I actually read Ibrahim X. Kendi's children's book, Anti-Racist Baby, to the chagrin of the panel. Good times were had. So I will get out of the way. This is Brian Meir from Brasil Wire, and we're talking contemporary Brazilian politics with a little bit of background history because some of the things that he's discussing need some context. But I did get to do this with my co-host. I always love the questions that my co-host throws at people, so I think this was a really good episode. Thank you guys so much, and I am out. All right, we are live, and I'm just going to get right to it. I'm here. Usually the audio podcast is just me, but today I'm here with my co-host, my homie, my dog, Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings.
And go ahead. Might be a delay. And we are speaking with Brian Mier. He hosts. You have a show on TeleSur? Or you're a correspondent on TeleSur?
I'm the Brazil correspondent for TeleSur English, and I have a web TV show in Portuguese for Brazil 247, and I'm co-editor of Brasil Wire.
And I was trying to learn Portuguese when I went to Brazil, and it didn't take for me. Maybe I'm too old. Too old to learn a new language, but when I was in Brazil touring, we were definitely in a lot of places where people just didn't speak English.
They don't speak a lot of English in Brazil, and the left traditionally will make a point of not learning English, just because it's considered the language of imperialism.
Ooh.
And ironically, a lot of them will learn French instead, which is also a language of imperialism, but not as bad in the U.S. in South America as English, I guess. I don't know.
Well,
Portuguese is a language of imperialism too. So
you're making me feel bad now that I was over there speaking English. Like,
seriously, what can you do? What can you do? Some people come down and try and speak Spanish, but it's not that close.
It really isn't.
You can get that far with
It really is not that close. And it's funny that you say that because it was me and my drummer that went down. We went down as a two-piece. And I remember he's like, it was just like Spanish. I was like, no, I don't think so. And because there might be a couple words that are the same, he's like, see? I was like, nah, man. You sit there and speak Spanish, people, they're going to look at you like you're a goddamn idiot. Which they do.
Yeah, they might thank you for trying to communicate. There's a lot of key words that are completely different in Spanish and Portuguese. It seems it seems similar, but then you get into it and you realize, so like I can get by in Spanish, but it gives me a migraine trying to mix Spanish with Portuguese and communicate with people.
Now, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, and I was down there in 2019, and there were these massive protests that happened. So a few things happened when I was down there. There were some massive protests about a change in pensions, and also the Intercept piece. I want to say that like the day before we left, the Intercept piece had came out saying, talking about Sergio Moro's involvement in Lula being locked up.
Yeah, that was a big deal for sure.
It was huge. It was a huge.
Both of those things, yeah.
Yeah, both of those things were, and they were shocking to me. First of all, the protests were shocking to me because, as we said offline, there is an organized left in Brazil that it'd probably be hard for the average U.S. person to fathom, because these protests were massive in scale.
Yeah,
and they really disrupted commerce.
Yeah, I guess like imagine if you had like Black Lives Matter protests that were better coordinated or more thoroughly coordinated among all of the local, at the base level, not going through some top hierarchy, but at the base level, coordinated among all the different groups, thousands of towns across the United States, in a way that, like, as I was saying before we came on, in this case, what they did on the day of the pension protests was that it was a coordinated action of the labor unions, the student movement, high school and university student movements, and the social movements like the MST and housing movements and squatters movements, things like that. They organized it so that they started the morning off shutting down key roads during rush hour in major cities across the country with burning tires. This is like a preview. And then the street protests started off in a rolling fashion, first in cities of like 100,000 and 300,000 in the morning, and gradually kicking off in bigger and bigger cities until by the end of the day, all of the major cities in Brazil were shut down.
I mean,
the central areas of the city just shut down.
Like airports were shut down. I know public transportation was shut down. Again, it's not, shutting down a freeway and then everybody taking selfies. Like this was, this was on a whole nother level of you are not
several of the
you're not
several of the major airports.
Yeah. I thoroughly impressed. And the Greenwald piece, when it leaked, a lot of people followed Intercept Brazil. The people that I was with definitely followed the Intercept Brazil and really appreciated that that journalistic work that was going on with the Intercept Brazil journalists and busting that story open.
Except I would like to just add a caveat here. The hacker, who's the one who took all the risk on this, he's facing 300 one-year prison sentences.
Jesus.
The Intercept did not succeed in protecting him or his identity. And secondly, before we get into this, just to explain, this guy, his name's Wagner Delgatti. He sliced through the backup files of 5 years of Telegram conversations between all of the prosecutors in the Lava Jato investigation. And in many cases, they were like replaying audio messages that they'd heard from Sergio Moro, the judge. And it was conversations about what they were telling Moro and what they were telling this and that politician and this and that person from the FBI and the U.S. Department of Justice and blah, blah, blah. He originally gave the Intercept like a sample of what he had of 57 gigabytes of conversations. And then he said, look, I've got 6 terabytes. And the Intercept came back to him and said, oh, we don't want it. This is going to give us enough information to publish a lot of articles. We're fine with it. And so they spent over a year releasing bit by bit just a tiny fragment of that 57 gigabytes that they received. So finally, the Supreme Court stepped in, seized the 6 terabytes of conversations, and freed them up to Lula's defense team. Immediately, they started filing all of these motions to dismiss based on information that had not been released by the Intercept. A lot of information about, like, one thing that and we don't know like what exactly the intercept had or not. But the thing we do know that the hacker himself is complaining that they didn't want the rest of the information, and he's also saying they only released a little bit of what they received. So we don't know if they had this. But one thing that the lawyers released is that Chief Prosecutor Delton Dallagnol, the day Lula was arrested, he said this was a gift from the CIA.
I saw that recently. Yeah.
Yeah, we're getting we've got all this. So the issue is like, why should, in my mind, it's an ethical question about why the private sector should control something related to the political rights of an ex-president in the second biggest nation in the in the Western Hemisphere or something. Like, I mean, like the minute that lawyers got a hold of these leaked conversations, you see, within 1 week, all charges were reversed against Lula. They started filing motions on evidence that they had that they, for whatever reason, had not been released by the Intercept. Maybe because they didn't have time or whatever. But I mean, it's a billionaire-owned corporation. They should have the time and resources to go through that information properly and think about what would help. I mean, it's a private company owned by a tech billionaire that's sitting on information beneficial to the defense of a former political prisoner who was wrongly arrested in a US-backed operation with no material evidence on trumped-up charges that were forum shopped to a neighboring state where he'd never lived, where the apartment he was being accused that he owned, that he never owned, was located and everything, So it just makes me think it's a little bit of on the one hand, like everyone's really grateful that the Intercept came out with that stuff. I mean, it was a big deal. It was really good. On the other hand, I don't think they really handled the information. I feel like if it had been like Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and stuff like that, the defense team would have had access to information they needed a lot quicker than in this process where the Intercept decided they were going to like every week release an article with a new piece of Telegram conversation on it. I'm not trying to say like what they. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think it was due to the Intercept's lack of due diligence that caused him to get incarcerated, the whistleblower?
I can't say. It just seems like at the most, I mean, at the least, it's a coincidence that so many of these whistleblowers end up getting arrested after communicating with Intercept people, like Reality Winner and these other people.
Yeah, Chelsea Manning.
I mean, you would think they could have like gotten him out of Brazil, maybe, or something. They could have done something because they've got the money for it. It doesn't seem like they really came up with much of a plan for his safety.
The person's name that you mentioned is pretty much, no one talks about it. And I'm not saying this because I think the guy's a bad guy or not. I don't know him personally, but it seems like more people were focused on Glenn Greenwald and his safety.
Exactly, right? Exactly. I mean, this guy is a hero, Walter Delgado. And the reason that Lula's charges were all reversed and that his political rights were restored was because the Supreme Court got a hold of this information, admitted it as evidence, and released it to Lula's defense lawyers. It's the defense lawyers that have uncovered all of this information that got Lula off. It wasn't the Intercept. Like, it wasn't because of the Intercept that Lula had his charges reversed. If the Intercept had maintained its monopoly over this information, Lula would not be free to run for office next year yet.
He's not free to run yet?
He is. Okay. He wouldn't be if the Intercept had maintained its monopoly. Now he's free to run because the Intercept lost, not necessarily because, but like coincidentally, shortly after the Intercept lost control of its monopoly over this leaked information, all of a sudden the lawyers got a hold of it, and now Lula's, had his political rights restored, declared innocent. I'm not accused, like, these things can happen for a million reasons. No, maybe it was just like too much information that for them to read through or something. I'm not saying like it was a giant conspiracy or anything like that. I just feel like that it's an ethical issue that they could have shared the information with the public or with the lawyers or something instead of trying to hold on to it.
So now that Lula's free to run, and it looks like Bolsonaro is losing some political power, and people are stepping down. I saw that recently in the last 2 days, a lot's been happening in Brazilian politics.
That is correct. Basically, Bolsonaro, who we like to refer to as Bozo, no disrespect to Bozo the Clown, WGN, where I grew up near their headquarters in Chicago, but we like to call him Bozo. He lost 6 cabinet ministers in one day, and then the next day, yesterday, the commanders of the Army, Navy, and Air Force resigned.
Yeah.
Okay, and so what? There's like dueling narratives on this down here. You know, some people are saying, well, it's a sign of weakness. It's a sign that the traditional center right, which is connected to the traditional like plantation owning families from slavery days who run politics in the countryside, who run all the agribusiness, beef and soy, that they're flexing their muscles. And so he got rid of some of his wackier far-right ministers, like his foreign affairs chancellor, Ernesto Araújo, who's like someone who believes everything he read in the Da Vinci Code and thinks that there's a communist conspiracy in charge of the, it's like people just call him like a Templar.
Is that the guy that talks about cultural Marxism all the time?
Yes, yeah, exactly. That guy. He had to step down because basically, like, that's great. You want to copy your boy Steve Bannon and trash China the whole time. You might want to think about the fact that it's your country's biggest trade partner, and your job is to maintain good relationship with your trade partners as foreign affairs minister. Like, this is really like, I mean, the Chinese embassy, which is, Chinese diplomats are, famously, very cautious and very careful with their words and stuff. They issued an official complaint about him for being racist against Chinese. So he's gone. And so that's the one argument of the narrative. On the one side, it's like, look, some of the more far right wackos are gone, and some more moderate people are coming in.
But that guy wanted.
So this is a sign that
too, right? The gentleman.
Pardon me?
The gentleman that you said stepped down. That's the wacko. Also wanted to return to the dictatorship, correct?
Yeah. Well, most of Bolsonaro wants to return to the dictatorship. Most of his clowns do. But basically, so there's that. But at the same time, some people are arguing that like the shakeup in the military, like he got rid of his minister of defense and switched around the minister of justice and things like that. But it looked like Bolsonaro was trying to execute an auto coup inside of his government, which is already kind of a coup government in itself. His government has the highest number there's more military people in his government, including 16 cabinet ministers and thousands of military officers in different areas of the federal government. There's more of them now than there were during the last 2 governments of the last 2 dictators. So like there's a higher military presence now than there was actually in the dictatorship, right? So some people were saying, well, isn't he just kind of like getting rid of the military officers who were trying to uphold the Constitution and replacing them with farther right-wing military officers so that he can shut down the Supreme Court, which is what seems to be something he was trying to do. And so there's 2 arguments. One is that this was a coup attempt that failed, and the other is that this is Bolsonaro caving in and giving more power to traditional conservative elites. And I think there's elements of both in it. It's definitely a sign that, okay, and there's a third thing I'll add here, which is like 2 weeks ago, a group of the most powerful bankers and business elites in Brazil and economists wrote this public letter saying that they've lost faith in the Bolsonaro government for his handling of COVID and that he needs to be replaced immediately. And so it looks like these military who left, who were fired or stepped down, were siding with economic elites against Bolsonaro. And it seems like Bolsonaro had pressured his defense minister to override the Supreme Court order that restored Lula's political rights. And if, for the army, the military to do that, that would be illegal, right? I mean, so he's essentially requesting that the military did this kind of like, I don't know the name of what Hitler did when it's not Kristallnacht, but something else. One of these things where like all of a sudden one of the branches of government's just been taken over by the military. And because of that, his refusal to do that, General Fernando Azevedo e Silva just resigned as defense minister. And so Bolsonaro then was telling everyone the following day that he was firing the heads of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. But they came out and said, no, they quit in solidarity with General Fernando Azevedo e Silva. So it seems like the idea that he was doing this all of this master plan to have this clampdown and everything, it's not, he was just flailing around trying to save his ass right now, really, is what it comes down to. Because when he took power, he was supported by, the US through the Trump administration, business elites who were terrified that PT would take power back again and undo all of the privatizations that happened after Dilma Rousseff was thrown out. The international petroleum industry was supporting Bolsonaro because they were terrified that PT would undo petroleum privatizations and stuff like that. He had support of a larger percentage of the population, and he had support from the judiciary and the military when he took power in 2019. Piece by piece, he's losing all of those people. The media also supported his rise to power. The Guardian supported his rise to power.
Do you think partially it's because of COVID, much like Trump here in the States?
Yeah. Partially, it's a big factor, the COVID. But there's a lot of other things too, because like most Brazilian people are like really against privatizations. Like, I'll give you an example. He raised the retirement age. That's not a popular thing to do. No one wants that. He raised the retirement age. He's done all kinds of shitty things. And on top of that, his kids are all under investigation for corruption. One of his kids is implicated in the assassination of Marielle Franco. Yeah, so the idea that he had convinced his people, Bannon, who was backing him, everyone had convinced a large percentage of the Brazilian population that he was not corrupt. That's kind of crumbled too. And then another thing is like he spent a year inundating the social media with all this misinformation about how most Americans, almost all Americans, supported Donald Trump because he was in love with Donald Trump. And his sons are friends with the Bannon and everything like that. So he had convinced everyone, all of his followers, that Trump was going to be reelected. And then when Biden won the election, he convinced his followers that it was robbed. He repeated that Sidney Powell lie and everything. And that on the social media, everyone in Brazil who followed Bolsonaro was saying in January 6th, Trump was going to take back control. Like we knew about this a month in advance. It's funny that no one in the US knew about it. We were reading it all the time. Like on the web TV show I do down here, I was always getting trolled by these Bolsonaro people saying, wait till January 6th. And so when that failed, and we know his son, Eduardo, went to the Washington, D.C. on January 5th, and he was at that war council meeting with Giuliani and all of those other clowns. When that failed, some of his followers were just kind of like, well, I guess he wasn't telling us the truth. A lot of Brazilian conservatives have been like brought up to worship the United States. And so the fact that like most Americans didn't support Trump has got some of the conservative followers of Bolsonaro going, wait a second, he was lying to us about Americans. And so that's chipped away at his approval rate as well. And of course the COVID stuff, because now it's just like a disaster. Now it's like 3,500 people dying a day from his clownship. And I know all kinds of stories but one of the first people I knew who died from COVID was a Bolsonaro fan, who just like wasn't wearing a mask because Bolsonaro wasn't, who was telling people not to wear masks. And, I could tell a million stories about this, about Bolsonaro followers getting COVID. But so now I think a lot of the people who believed what he was saying about chloroquine and not needing to wear a mask and not needing to socially distance. I think that's coming back to bite him because a lot of his followers have died, or infected family members and stuff. My wife is from a town in the countryside of Minas Gerais called Uberaba, and she's already lost 5 relatives in that city.
Jesus.
But in this bakery near her parents' house where she grew up, the owner was this fanatic Bolsonaro fan. And one of his workers came in coughing and saying he had COVID and he wanted the day off. And the guy was like, fuck that. You can't be a wimp. Suck it up. It's just a cold. And so the guy worked there all day. Like 9 people who worked in the bakery died, including the son of the owner.
Wow.
So there's these incidents going around, and like everyone's telling stories about them. And that's definitely chipping away at his popularity. And of course, the first press conference Lula had after his political rights were restored, he came out with a mask on. Everyone's with a mask. He said, look, unlike our current president, I believe in science. I believe the earth is round. I listen to doctors. And that night, Bolsonaro came on one of his Facebook Lives, which he does every night. He was like shaking. He was so nervous. And he was wearing a mask for the first time in a year. And then he fired his health minister like a week later. So a lot of this is also what's the shakeup is reaction against Lula. Because Lula is just like a force to be reckoned with because he knows how to talk to people, all kinds of people. Like he can transmit complex ideas in everyday language that could be understood by someone who doesn't even have a grade school education.
That man's
including about economics and things
hell
like
of
that.
an organizer. Did you want to add something, Pascal?
Yeah, I'm curious as to what's the Biden administration's position.
Where is he?
Can you hear me? Yes, Brian, the question I had for you is what is the posture of the Biden administration towards Bolsonaro in light of their seeming hostility towards all the pink-tide administrations in Latin and South America?
That's a great question, and it's a complicated one, because we know, first of all, the Lava Jato investigation, which didn't just cause Lula's arrest and contribute to the illegal impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, but actually destroyed key sectors of Brazil's economy in 2015 and generated 4.4 million layoffs when Judge Sergio Moro, the US-backed operative, paralyzed the 5 largest construction companies in the country, causing 4 of them to go bankrupt and paralyzed and ended Brazil's shipbuilding industry. Like we know that all started during the Obama administration, and Biden was, vice president at that time. Then they seemingly had another plan. I don't think their idea was to first of all, I've talked to Lula about this too, and like Lula doesn't think that Obama really had any control over the State Department. And also, he doesn't think Obama had much control. He thinks that Lula knows that Obama kind of stabbed him in the back a couple times, and especially like on the Iran deal they negotiated that then the U.S. backed out of after he'd asked him to do it, without telling Hillary, I guess. And Lula got mixed up in that. He knows he got stabbed in the back by the Obama administration, but he's also said like he thinks that Obama was young, inexperienced, and didn't understand what the actual powers he had as president were in the beginning, and didn't have a lot of control over what the State Department was doing, And I've talked to Mark Weisbrot, said the same thing in an interview with him. So because I see that because everyone's always like, what about Obama? What about Obama? What about Obama? When I talk about Trump and Bolsonaro and stuff, it's like, yeah, well, Obama shares part of the blame for this mess. But I wouldn't say that like Bolsonaro's in power just because of Obama. I think that the State Department does whatever it wants. I mean, it rarely, I don't think that, because you don't see really any difference between Republicans and Democrats in Latin America policy. And you see the same big figures in the State Department again and again working in Democrat and Republican administrations. And so I'm bringing this up because one of the key operatives during the coup against Dilma Rousseff, was Tom Shannon, who was he was an adjunct or assistant secretary of state for Latin America. He took a demotion to become ambassador to Brazil during the period of the coup. And he gave the coup against Dilma, that you could see an edge of democracy and stuff like that. And he gave an interview to Brazil's Wall Street Journal, O Valor, about 3 months before Biden won the elections, saying that if Biden won, the Biden administration would work to maintain good relationships with Bolsonaro so that they could work together to further isolate Venezuela. And Bolsonaro has been bending over for the U.S. on the Venezuela issue the entire time.
And Biden has said that he's recognized Juan Guaido as the rightful president.
That's what I mean. You look at, we were expecting at least that there would be some rollback of these sanctions back to the levels that they were in the Obama administration, which is still really bad. They're still killing people. But what Trump did was you can't get insulin into the country now and stuff. People are dying. But he's not doing any of that. To the contrary. And this stuff he's doing with standing up for human rights of Janine Áñez, the coup leader in Bolivia, who ordered massacres of union leaders and indigenous rights people. Blinken now is worried about her civil rights when no one opened their mouth when Lula was imprisoned, who lifted 39 million people out of poverty, right? And was unjustly imprisoned. And Janine Áñez is involved in murder, ordering killings and torture and things like that. But it's a human rights issue. So we're very disappointed. Not disappointed because let's be honest, we didn't think there was going to be that much of a change. However, what's interesting is that despite no signs of easing up against this return of the pink tide, which is rebuilding in Latin America now, Argentina, Cuba, Ecuador, Bolivia, and all of this, it does look like they're distancing themselves from Bolsonaro. It looks like this interview that Tom Shannon gave about maintaining peaceful, good relations with Bolsonaro, and this guy Ernesto Araujo did a charm tour of the U.S. virtually a couple weeks ago, where ASCOA, this think tank that was founded by the Rockefellers, it's corporate-funded think tank for right-wing reforms in Latin America, they hosted him for this big event, and now he's gone. And I think that what the Biden administration has decided, also there's a lot of pressure against Biden from the Progressive Caucus. And I'm not talking about the squad here, but some traditional progressive Democrats that are connected, some of them to the Congressional Black Caucus, like Hank Johnson. And even Bobby Rush signed these solidarity letters for Lula when he was in jail, but also some of these lesser known Congress people who just are more who are just traditionally connected to the unions and things like that. They're putting a lot of pressure on Biden right now in regards to Brazil. Okay. And I think the turning point, my take on this, I'm just speculating, but I think there's this internal debate in the DNC about what they should do in relation to Bolsonaro, and the traditional State Department actors, like Shannon, these other people are no, let's just keep working with him because he can help us go after Venezuela. I think that, and the progressives are saying this is ridiculous, the whole time. I think the turning point was the discovery that Jair Bolsonaro's son Eduardo was in that War Council meeting on January 5th in Washington. I think it's impossible for the Biden administration to pretend that everything's fine and they can maintain good relationships with Bolsonaro right now. And there's the COVID issue as well, in that it's a risk for the world that all these new mutations are spreading around in Brazil right now. But I think also, just politically, you can't really justify working with this government anymore down here. Now, this doesn't mean that Biden administration is going to support a comeback of the left or anything like that. I mean, their ideal candidate would be a neoliberal who just uses better.
Michel Temer.
Yeah, he's
Michel
Temer's
Temer,
history now. Temer's like almost 80. He's just, but someone like that, yeah,
but
like
like
that,
that
like
type of
someone who like uses more inclusive language and doesn't threaten to rape women on the floor of Congress like Bolsonaro did against Congresswoman Maria Rosario and things like that. I mean, there's like some basic stuff that, as neoliberal as the Democrats are, there's certain types of behavior that they don't support. And I think like calling to like kill all gay people and threaten to rape women and stuff like that doesn't go over very well. I mean,
yeah. He's a clown. I mean, Bolsonaro kind of that. I think that's why Americans were calling him the Trump of the tropics because of his very clownish behavior. But I think the average American doesn't really have a grasp on the damage that someone like Michel Temer caused
yeah.
after the Rousseff coup. I mean, I saw it in graffiti almost everywhere I went. Is it? I forget how you say fuck. It's like
Foda.
Pada, Para.
Pod, I mean,
Foda.
stop.
Sorry. No, it wasn't
Yeah,
stop. It
Foda.
was maybe it was Foda. Yeah,
For,
fuck
Fora,
Temer.
no, it's Fora.
Yeah,
Out
like
with
everywhere.
Temer, Fora. Fora. Yeah, that's
Oh,
what it was.
okay.
I mean, I would see fuck Temer stuff too, obviously, but well, Temer, like nobody liked him. He was polling at like 6%. He's widely despised, and he stabbed his former allies in the back. So he's a big actor in this process too, and like he's the one who froze. He enacted a constitutional amendment freezing health spending for 20 years, which is one of the reasons our health system is collapsing right now. So he was widely despised, but the U.S. would like someone like that, maybe younger, maybe a woman, someone who uses woke language but wants to privatize everything and turn everything over.
And don't you have a few of those in Brazil Congress?
Yeah, a few, but not. It's the problem is that most of them are now burned because they all supported Bolsonaro 2 years ago. So like even they could like this guy João Doria. He's trying to present himself as the rational alternative to Bolsonaro, and he's the real Trump of Brazil because he was the host of Trump's Brazilian franchise of The Apprentice down here. So he actually is the Trump of Brazil. He's a businessman who billed himself as an outsider to become São Paulo governor. But so he's been on CNN and BBC talking about like how fascism is so dangerous for Brazil and how he's against fascism. He ran for governor 2 years ago. He had T-shirts printed up that said Bolsa Doria on them with the colors of the Bolsonaro campaign. And he did all these posts for all these selfies with Bolsonaro. And he basically won the election by red baiting his opponent, who is a conservative, also a conservative former ally from the Brazilian Socialist Party is ideologically across the board. It's not socialist at all. So this guy was like a businessman from the Brazilian Socialist Party who had been the vice governor under Doria's own political party, PSDB, in the previous governmentship. And he just like, he used all of his commercial time to call the guy a communist. The guy's like the former owner of a shoe factory or something. He's not a communist at all. No,
Not
and
a
so
shoe co-op.
he's trying to position himself as and luckily this fight between him and Bolsonaro has resulted in Sao Paulo having better COVID policies, like working to get vaccines manufactured here instead of working with China and all this. But he's a guy who, when he was mayor of Sao Paulo, he ordered his municipal guard to remove blankets from homeless people during winter. And he tried to serve this ration for school children that looked like dog food, this protein product in the school meals. So he's just as fascist as Bolsonaro, except he wears like polo shirts and uses polite language. So I don't think that's going to take. I don't think a guy like that has the power of taking office. I think the U.S. Democratic Party might get in a position where they have to back Lula next year, or at least not interfere. Interfere. I don't think they'll ever back him. But, at least they might not interfere.
Did you want to say something, Pascal?
I was about to say, do you think it's possible that the United States would support a buffer candidate to avoid Lula? Because I think that the Biden administration is showing so much hostility to these left-leaning leaders in South America, and I'm looking at their posture in Haiti with Jovenel Moïse, it seems like they'd be totally reticent to even support Lula.
Well, like I said, I don't think they're going to ever support him, but they might decide not to interfere. Okay. As far as buffer candidates, they've been trying this in every election since 2002, and it's never worked. Like they can never get a buffer candidate off the ground in Brazil, you know? And so, you know how I'm sure you guys know how the intelligence and governmental foreign policy works and stuff. They work according to like lists of desirable outcomes that are ranked in order of desirability. So like the first choice for the US would certainly to be some kind of neoliberal who uses polite language. Then without any need of US interference, just naturally being elected. That would be their most desirable outcome. And then you go down the scale and the bottom would be like Bolsonaro, maybe, you know, or a military coup or a military invasion. Military invasion would be the bottom on the list of desirable outcomes. In 2018, it's clear that they thought Bolsonaro was more desirable than the PT party taking power, obviously, right? I think now that maybe on their list of desirable outcomes, a PT victory next year might be like number 9 instead of number 10 Bolsonaro. So like they're going to definitely put money into buffer candidates. But if those buffer candidates don't take on, which I don't think they can because it's so polarized right now, there's no middle left really. I think that they might at this point, and this might be wishful thinking, they might, for whatever reason, you know, decide that they're not going to intervene and they'll allow the elections to run and allow the PT to take power again. And the reason I say that is because between 2005 and 2010 or 2011, more or less, the U.S. government, I remember once I met a guy from the World Bank and we were talking and stuff. When I used to work in NGO field after I stopped teaching English in Brazil, which I hated. You know, and I met some crazy people in that field, but I was eating lunch with a director of the International Finance Corporation in 2006. And he told me that we were talking about Evo Morales. And he was like, well, we like Evo Morales a little bit, but, you know, we really have to work to get him to side more with Brazil and Argentina, and so that we can isolate Hugo Chavez and Rafael Correa, right? So I think there was a moment because of the conjecture, not that the U.S. ever supported social democracy in Latin America, but they kind of had this idea that it would be more desirable to have someone like Lula or Cristina Kirchner, Nestor Kirchner in power than people like Chavez in power. It's kind of reminds me of like in the Cold War, the way that workers had more rights in the United States and in Europe because they knew that if they didn't allow some kind of worker rights and benefits for the working class, that communism could get more popular. So I think there might be.
That's interesting.
It's just speculation, you know.
Did you want to follow up on that, Pascal?
So, Mike, do you think that after Bolsonaro, assuming that he loses, that Brazil's flirtation with fascism would be over? Or do you think that, like in America, that the tide has changed so much that it's a specter that can't be avoided?
Well, I think fascism never left in Brazil. And you just have to look at what the military police, what they do. Like Brazil never, when the dictatorship ended, everyone got amnesty. And they never demilitarized the police. And now, like the Workers' Party submitted 3 constitutional amendment proposals over the last 20 years to end the military police. They never had more than 22% of control of Congress. Their more conservative allies always blocked it. But it's a historical fight of the Workers' Party to end the military police. They've never managed to. It just shows how little control, really, like someone like Lula actually had over his government and everything. When you think he had 22% of Congress, they were unable to stop the military police. And when the dictatorship ended, the two official political parties from the military dictatorship were allowed to just change their name, and all of the congressmen and senators just got to stay in office and run for election normally in the following election cycle, and they kept
That's
control.
nuts.
And they still control the House and Senate. These parties that are directly connected to the dictatorship. So there's never what's happened though. The only change that's happened is I've always known people who are sympathetic to fascism in Brazil. I've always had met people like they wish the dictatorship would come back, and it was always like 20%. And the police are fascist. You know, you look at the special forces in Sao Paulo, the Rota. That's a death squad. And in Rio, their symbol of the special forces is like a skull with two swords pushed through it. That's what's on the side of their cop cars and stuff. It's like they never fascisted the police. So there was always that 20% of the country, I think, that was fascist. The difference is they used polite language to mask the fascism. They used code words, and things like that. And what happened with Bannon's partnership with Bolsonaro and things like that is that the language is just like, it's all out in the open now. So there were people who you could have maybe even been friends with 10 years ago, who you knew they're kind of like conservative and stuff like that, but you would always have polite conversations. But now it's just openly fascist rhetoric and fascist hate speech and stuff like that. So I don't think that it's going to go away. I just think it can shrink, I think as long as there's capitalism and that there's a way that the rich can blame other poor people for the abuses of workers and rights and things like that within a capitalist system, there's going to be fascism and fascist tendencies. It's a way that the capitalists can scapegoat other people for the fact that they're stealing everybody's benefits and rights and resources and things like that.
That's scary. It's very scary. Did you have something else, Pascal?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, how do the racial politics of Brazil contribute to these realities in terms of the relationships between the black and brown populations, which the ruling class, if at all, if you think they have an effect at all?
Well, I think, first of all, I've spent a lot of time, I've been in Brazil 25 years, right? And I'm from Chicago, which is a city that had a lot of racial segregation and things like that when I was growing up, and was very racist, extremely racist.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think, first of all, is that I think since race is like a social construct, every country has like their own kind of racism. And so sometimes people might go from one country to another country and think like, oh, there's no racism here. And it's just a different kind of racism, And so I think that it's very hard to try and explain, or even if I'm the right person to do it, differences in the racism and racial dynamic between Brazil and the United States. But it's important to note that despite these newspapers like The Guardian and emphasizing like that there's black people who support Bolsonaro and things like that, it's important to note that the people least likely to vote for Bolsonaro were Afro-Brazilians from the periphery of the cities, especially Afro-Brazilian women. That was the lowest group of Bolsonaro supporters, in a way that almost mirrors like support for Trump. And so, however, and there was huge gains for the Afro-Brazilian population during the PT years, mainly the fact that they built 17 new public universities, and they initiated the most ambitious affirmative action system, I think, in the history of the world, in that when Lula took office, 4% of the student population was Afro-Brazilian. And now, due to the structural changes they made that are impossible to undo, Bolsonaro hasn't even tried, 52% of public university students are Afro-Brazilian. Okay, and it's not because of specific racial-based affirmative action. It's class with a differential for race. So 52% of all slots in public universities have to go to people who studied in the public grammar and high school systems. And there's like a 5% test bonus for Afro-Brazilians. So what they did was they created equity in the university system. And Bolsonaro won't even touch this. All he's trying to do is gut funding for the universities. So that there were some major gains made. And a lot of, And this is one of the things that led to this fascist resurgence, because all of these super privileged rich white Brazilians who've grown up having like maids wash their underwear for them, all of a sudden they're having to compete with poor people, as they use the code word, whatever, maybe it's a code word, poor people, to get into the best universities in the country. So that like this created a huge backlash against black people and poor people in Brazil. And the way the Bolsonaro administration manipulated this, they used this kind of like Trumpian kind of thing where they try to use common sense language and turn it upside down and use it against people. So what Bolsonaro says is like, no, we're not racist like the PT. We think black people are just as smart as white people. That's why we don't believe in affirmative action. They don't need handouts. They're just as good as we are. Like some people who aren't that political or stuff might listen to that and go, yeah, well, that makes sense. I don't want people to think I'm less, smart. When actually the reason that there's this huge disparity in the university enrollment is because normally you have to pay for a private university exam preparatory class to be able to pass any entrance exam. And these the best ones are the most expensive ones. And it's only rich people who would afford to take them, So, I mean, that's one of it. It's not that there was an even playing field or something,
It's interesting that you say that. There's a documentary on Netflix, and I actually followed the story pretty closely here in the States. And if you follow this, I'd actually be shocked. There was a bunch of well-to-do people that weren't, I can buy a building to get my kid in, Kushner family rich, that were paying for what they called a side door into universities. And they were actually paying for their kids to take the SAT and ACTs. And it's interesting because these kids had college coaches. And I was speaking with my girlfriend. We were both watching it, and she actually did her master's at USC, which was one of the schools that they profiled there, because a lot of kids, because their parents were actors or whatever in LA, and they wanted to stay close. And USC is a very good private school, right? As the parents kept paying this exorbitant amount of money, they didn't talk about it too much in the documentary, but it's like, wait a minute, they had a coach just to fill out college applications. Yeah. Pascal, did you have a coach filling out your college applications with you and helping you write your essays? And it was fascinating that people that had this level of help and assistance still
couldn't get in, right? Like,
still couldn't get in, had their parents paying another $500,000 sometimes to get them into schools like University of California, Berkeley, which is a public university.
You see in Brazil, all of the studies that have been done on affirmative action students down here, they all get better grades than the non-affirmative action students. They're all doing, like, across the board in every university where the student, because you have to be so much smarter to come from like a favela or some mud house out in the countryside with no electricity, and get to the point where you can even compete on a university exam. Going through these crappy public schools that don't have any toilet paper in the bathrooms and stuff like, or books. And you get to the point where you're like getting up close to what a student who had a private coach for a year got on the same test score. Obviously, you're smarter.
Yeah.
That's the reason why a lot of these countries in like the developing world and things like that, why the elite seems so limited and so stupid sometimes, because they're just like, they limit themselves. They're shooting themselves in the foot. Some of their best potential scientists and doctors and things never even get a chance to show their talent. Like as shitty as the US is, and I hate the United States, at least there was a time in the US when it looked like any poor schmuck could come from another country and become a scientist or something. Like maybe I'm just romanticizing what I learned in grade school about Thomas Edison or something. But it does seem like there was a little bit more for a period, maybe until the Reagan years. But except then if you look at race, then it doesn't work. So I guess I'll take back what I said. But it seems like there's a little bit more
Did you
class
have something you wanted
mobility
to
in
say?
the U.S. than there are in some of these countries in Latin America.
Did you want to say something, Pascal?
No, I totally agree.
Pascal?
I mean, my parents come from Haiti, and we don't. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you lost me.
No,
There's a delay. There's a very long delay.
I spent a lot of time in Haiti.
No, I was saying is I agree with you in
last
terms
time.
of the lack of platform.
Pasquale, last time
were
I was
saying,
in
Brian?
Haiti, Pasquale, I was there after the earthquake, and I got a lot of friends in Haiti because I had work buddies who were Haitian before the earthquake, and went over there because our office building fell over. And
Jesus.
last time I was in Haiti, I was at the house of Jean-Claude Fignolet, who was like a writer, and he was mayor of Abricot for a while. And because I'm friends with his son, so I was like, go out and visit my dad in Pestel, right? So I was in Pestel. This is 2016,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden there's like someone wants to talk to you. I was like, okay. And so it's 6 a.m, so I'm driven to this weird hotel. And I go into this room, and it's a guy watching 2 different news programs at the same time. It was Guy Philippe. He was in town, and he wanted to talk to me.
Wow.
And he was running for Senate and on the run from the law at the same time. And he won. He won. But it was like, I know that he's a very controversial person, but it was an interesting conversation, because he was talking about like how he was showing that he was kind of like a nationalist in a good way. In certain sense, like he said that any time Haiti ever develops food security, the U.S. invades it. That Haiti has the capacity to produce all of the rice it needs, all of the different food items it needs, but the U.S. won't allow it to have food security. And that Hillary Clinton's brother tried to take over the telecommunications system after the earthquake. It was a super interesting conversation. I know it's one of those situations where you meet someone, you're like, well, is he a good guy or a bad guy or whatever? Like you can't really. But I still thought it was really interesting. Yeah. And then, so he got elected to the Senate, and like the ATF just came into Haiti and grabbed him, and now he's in jail in Miami or something, right?
Yep.
It's crazy, but that's a tangent. I know that's not.
No. This is the show of the Americas.
I just interviewed Celso Amorim last week about Haiti, about MINUSTAH. Yeah. So.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Maybe we might publish that.
There's a lot of Haitians have some bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Some Haitians have bad blood with Brazil about
as they,
Say again, Pascal. You broke up. Say again, Pascal. You broke up.
I said some Haitians have some bad blood with Brazil because of their role in MINUSTAH in Haiti.
Of course, right? Like, I mean, I was pretty critical, talking to them. However, I think at the same time, there's this kind of faction of, it's like almost like a coalition of vanguard left, anti-Lula, anti-PT, with some people who are very sympathetic to Aristide and everything, who are like spreading conspiracy theories around about Brazil's role in the MINUSTAH. At the same time, like, I can't make a apology, but like to say that like George Bush and Lula planned the coup against Aristide, that's a conspiracy theory. That's not like, it's not really. And when I interviewed Celso Amorim, he was like, first of all, like Kofi Annan was in charge of that operation. It wasn't the Brazilian, like Brazil's a partner, and the PT government believes in the UN system, and it agreed to come in, and okay, maybe it was a big mistake. At the same time, it wasn't like Brazil didn't control MINUSTAH, and they were getting constantly pressured to be more violent at the beginning. During that time of Cite Soleil and everything like that. There was even an Economist article that was complaining that they weren't using enough military force and all this stuff. And at the same time, he feels that the MINUSTAH had a key role in guaranteeing that Aristide's coalition would return to power in 2006 elections with Prevel, because he was saying that Condoleezza Rice and Kofi Annan were pressuring them to force a second round election because Prevel only had like 49%. And the Brazilians were just saying, look, that's ridiculous. We know he won the election. We're not going to have a... And they put military out and guaranteed that there was no second election held. And then Prevel, took office, and Prevel sucked. Like he wasn't, in my opinion, like I was there in 2010 when he signed over the right to no bid construction contracts rebuilding after the earthquake to the Clinton Foundation. Right? So I don't think Prevel was like this hero of anything. And not to mention that his wife's sewage disposal firm dumped all of that Nepalese sewage into that river that brought cholera back to the country. All this under Minustah, under Brazil, Brazil definitely has some part of the blame. I don't think it was a good move of their part to go to Haiti, and I saw how much people hated them when I was down there. But at the same time, I don't think it's fair to say at a moment when there's a strong chance that Lula could run for office and become president, and to like blame him for throwing out Aristide or something, or like causing the... You could say, the buck stops with him for the Sitsoleil massacre and things like that. Sure, definitely. But I mean, he didn't like give the order to do that. You know what I'm saying? Like he didn't order General Heleno to do a massacre, and they removed Heleno from Haiti 1 week afterwards. And Heleno's now one of the most powerful people in the Bolsonaro government. He hates the PT, he hates Lula. He fought to keep Lula in jail, And so if you look at it, anyway, I'm on a tangent now, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to translate the interview and publish it in Brasil Wire. And I think a lot of Haitians who read it, they might not come out of it saying, oh, well, this is great. Brazil was great. Everything that Brazil did was great. But at the same time, they might think, well, it's good to see another, what someone from the other side was saying about it.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, Brian. I know you're a busy person, so truly, truly appreciate this.
It was fun. And just, if you want to shorten anything or say anything that you don't think is relevant, just edit it if you want.
I enjoyed all of your tangents, actually. So your tangents are educational.
Great. Well, it was fun.
I hope you can get... what I would really love...
Hope you can get back down to Brazil with your band.
The drummer and I saw each other for the first time in months, and we talked about going down as a full band again, because the place that our tour manager down there runs a hostel bed and breakfast in Florianopolis called Rest and Roll. And so basically it's like right around the corner from the beach, and he has shows in the living room.
Wow.
Because he's in a punk band in Brazil called End of Pipe. And we were talking about going down there and instead of doing a tour like we did last time, just flying down and doing a show. But COVID is kind of ripping through.
Better wait a couple months.
Brazil. Yeah. Because it's definitely something we had a ball when we went down there and met a lot of good people. Actually, one of the people we played with passed away from COVID recently. Found that out through social media.
The new strain
we understand
is hitting
that it's
people in their 30s as hard as the original one was hitting people in their 70s.
Hard.
So the odds of getting on a ventilator now are not age connected. It looks like. That's what it looks like.
I saw the hospitals are stressed.
I'm actually flying up to New York next week with my family to get the vaccine and visit visit family members. So I was beginning to freak out from this because I was already racked out with double viral pneumonia last year for months, and I think that was COVID, but they didn't have the test yet. So I'm gonna get. We're out of here like on Sunday night. We're going up to New York, get vaccinated.
Hey man, I don't blame you, and I wish you and your family, best of luck. Come back safe.
All right.
And thank you. And